There we go. It's always helpful to have audio. Uh, Good morning. I'm the Expert Layman, and this is a meta guide to Zul'Aman. By meta, I mean I went through every guide I could find, and they don't always agree. So I thought I would build sort of a consensus of the things they agreed upon and include some best practices. Let me just do a little check here. And yes. This is also going to be an audio format primarily. I'll have, something on the screen, basically what I'm reading. But for some people, it's easier to listen, like me. If you're at work or driving or exercising. Oh, wait. Yeah. Considering this, the WoW stereotype, maybe not that one. But let you get familiar. Let you be more efficient with your time. And by meta, how do I put this? Well, I should first say that something about the nature of PTRs. And you'll see a lot of guys that say this is so easy, it's ridiculously easy, it's broken easy. But you have to remember that compared to the standard player base on World of Warcraft servers, these are fairly elite players. And they're also in best in slot gear. So if it wasn't ridiculously easy for them, Blizzard's doing something wrong. Also, I was not on the... Oh, I limited the guides to people on the test realms. And I was not. And in a way, it's better because I don't have it. I won't have the bias. Like if I was on there, I would have obviously think however I was doing it was the best way. So in a sense, there's a lack of bias. Now there was one guide that was much better than the rest, and that was from. Make sure. Well, I have it in my description. Dr. Kale has a channel called Get Carried, and that's also the name of the guild. Wrote out what I found to be the most inclusive and best guide. So I'm going to kind of be using that as the anchor and then supplementing or modifying his guide with consensus of other guides and some of the best practices that different people employed. So let's get started. And I'm basically just going to be reading this and then adding occasionally. First boss in Zul'Aman is Nalarak. 7,700 armor, about 1 million health, could be 1.7 million health. It's a test realm. This is a straightforward two-phase fight. Human phase and bear phase. This fight is traditionally tanked with two tanks who tank swap during phases to mitigate a ton of bleed damage. In human phase, which lasts 45 seconds, Nalarak has two abilities and a frontal cleave that ignores armor, and the damage can be split amongst the two tanks. Or it can be solo tanked if you're geared enough, or the healers are. His second ability in human phase is a charge, and it does 1,500 to 3,000 damage, depending on armor. And he picks the furthest target from him. In order to maximize DPS, have range and healers stand off to one side and one designated person to stand on the other side and soak the charges. Ideally, this is a hunter who doesn't lose as much DPS as a caster, and they have a little more armor. From what I got from the other guides, yeah, hunter is best, but if you don't have a hunter, boomkin is good because they have a ton of armor. And if you don't have a boomkin, do a shaman, and if you don't have a hunter, boomkin, or shaman, you're probably not a balanced raid, but then after that, it'd probably be Shadow Priest. Okay, back to the review. Nalarak also applies a mangled debuff, and just like the druid, this increases bleed damage taken by 100%, which is why tank swap in bear phase is usually less stressful on the healers because of the bear doing two different bleeds. In bear phase, which lasts 30 seconds, Nalarak stops charging the furthest player, But instead, every 15 seconds, he does a roar that silences anyone within a few yards for 2 seconds. His first bleed is Lacerate, and that should be doing around 750 physical damage every 2 seconds for 18 seconds. His second bleed is called Rend, and that does a little over 2,000 damage every second for 8 seconds. With the Mangle debuff, those damage values go up by 100%. Again, this damage is healable if the tank is geared enough, or pops a cooldown, but for most groups, just taunt only when Bear phase begins. Basically tank swap through it. This phase is purely tank damage, so focus all of your heals on the one tank who is tanking Bear. Tips and tricks. Armor is a really good stat here for tanks, so things like Iron Shield Potions, Scrolls of Protection, Devotion Aura, the Shaman and Priest armor buffs from critical heals, or improved lay on hands will greatly reduce the damage the boss does. This is where some of the other guides take exception because, as far as I know, bleed effects are not mitigated by armor. So maybe they're saying reducing the other damage. Not really sure. But Paladin tanks, while you're swapping, can, bubble out of the bleed effects and the debuffs. I said earlier, making 2 different groups in human phases increases the DPS because not everyone is getting knocked back, and most people don't have to turn their character for the boss to be in front of you. Akelzon. 7,700 armor, 1.3 million health. This is a one-phase fight, but the boss has a few abilities that are easy to handle. First ability is called Static Disruption and hits for 2,120 damage and applies a debuff that increases all nature damage taken by 20%. This debuff can stack. Also, when the spell hits a target, it jumps to anyone else within 10 yards. This ability is why everyone needs to spread out on this fight. Akelzon's next ability is an air burst where he tosses someone up into the air, to which they take about 50% of the total HP in fall damage. This can be mitigated by any slow fall abilities, bubbling, blinking, ice block. Druids and rogues won't take much from this, if anything. That would also be levitate. Akelzon's final ability is called Electrical Storm. This places one character 20 yards off the ground, and anyone not standing underneath that character takes 3,000 nature damage every second. This damage, of course, would do additional damage if you have the Static Disruption debuff. This ability has a cooldown, which DBM tracks, and even when the timer goes off, that just means he now has the ability to use it. He usually uses 1 or 2 more of his other abilities first, and then lets the storm go off. When this timer hits 0, every raid member should move in closer to the boss to cut down the amount of distance they will have to cover. After Electrical Storm finishes, immediately spread out, as he will always cast a Static Disruption right after. And this is something every guide said. The final part of the fight is where Ascalon hits 30%. Eagles join the fight, and they pretty much do nothing other than swoop down and do minor damage to a raid member. These eagles can be killed to remove the damage, but most groups ignore them or have a warlock cast 2 or 3 seeds of corruption, which kills them. Tips and tricks. Spread out 15 yards apart. Watch the DBM timer for Electrical Storm. Use any personals or health stones while running under the storm. We usually all stack on the boss after he casts 1 ability after the timer hits 0. So DBM hits 0, wait for him to do 1 thing, and then everybody moves in. And that way we don't have to move at all. When Electrical Storm has 2 seconds worth of cast remaining, start to run back to your original position. Halazi, the Lynx. 7,700 armor, 600,000 health. This is a 3-phase fight and considered to be the easiest boss in Zul'Aman. Halazi is by himself until taken to 75%, 50%, and 25%. In this phase 1, he has a frenzy, which just increases his attack speed, and this can be tranquilized by a Hunter Trike Shot. His other ability is Saber Slash, and this hits for 47k to 52k, and split between 2 players, and it's mitigated by armor. Phase 2, you will see sorry, there are some grammatical errors in here, and it kind of screws with my dyslexia. You'll see phase 2 3 times, and it's at 75, 50, and 25% HP. Alazi's health goes to 100%, which is now 240k, and this phase ends when he reaches 20% of that health. Upon going into this phase, he uses Transfigure, which does 4k damage to the raid. This ability looks like a Holy Nova. After Transfigure goes out, Alazi now gains some different abilities. He drops a Corrupted Lightning Totem, which has 2500 health and casts lightning bolts at players that do 3,000 to 5,000 damage, and chains to nearby players and is casted frequently. He gains 2 shock spells as well. Flame Shock, which does 3,000 to 5,000 damage, and ticks for 4,000 damage, and this can be dispelled. The other is Earth Shock, which does 5,000 damage and interrupts spellcasting. Along with these abilities, he summons a Lynx into the battle that despawns the moment you get him out of this phase. The Lynx melees the tank and does nothing more than that, and the Lynx is tauntable. This pet is usually ignored and just tanked. DPS should not be cleaving it, as tanks aren't putting a whole lot of threat into it. The Lynx can do a Sunder Armor debuff, but it usually falls off by the time Saber Slash hits. Phase 3 begins at 25%, and this is just like the first phase, except he continues to drop his totem, and he enrages, giving him increased melee damage. Tips and tricks. Bloodlust on the pull, and straight nuke the boss. Only melee and hunters should swap to the totem, but everyone else should single target. Make sure to dispel flame shocks. They have a nasty dot. Depending on scripting, the totems may be stunnable as well. Very easy and quick fight. Janali, Dragonhawk, 7,700 armor, 1 million health. This is a single phase fight with adds that spawn along the way. This fight is all about control. His first ability, Flame Breath, which is a cone that has a long range but small width and hits for 45,000 fire damage, so spread out. The next thing Janali would do is summon 2 Amani Hatchers with very low HP into the fight that will come up the stairs as you did. Come up the same stairs you did when you first roll up to the boss. These mobs will then go to each side of the platform, if not killed, and begin to hatch Amani Dragonhawks at an accelerated rate over time. These Dragonhawks also have low HP and are 100% slowable, stunnable, etc. The key here is to kill one hatcher and let the other hatcher hatch all the eggs from one side. At 35%, Janali will hatch all the eggs if any are left. These Dragonhawks do very little damage, but they apply a debuff on the target, which increases fire damage taken. Flame buff it. Also during this fight, Janali will use another ability called Fire Bombs. He will periodically teleport the entire raid to him, put up flame walls on all the exits, and begin spawning time bombs. By the way, if you decide to touch the flame wall, it is a very high damage burn dot that is applied to you and will usually kill the player. After 10 seconds, these bombs explode. At 20%, Janali enrages, increasing damage and attack speed. At this time, all Dragonhawks should be dead, so just burn the boss. Tips and tricks. This fight can be made substantially easier if you just slow or stop DPS at 40% and wait for the hatchers to hatch all the Dragonhawks. Frost traps and improved blizzard are a huge addition to this fight. We let side one hatch and then we push the boss and AoE slow the other side. A lot of the guides basically said, just do one side and then he'll send more hatchers out later and do the other side. But killing both of the hatchers is very bad because then they all hatch at the same time and they're coming from 2 sides and it's a nightmare. Ex-Lord Malakris, 6,200 armor, 1.9 million health. This is a single-phase fight that changes depending on one of his abilities, where he steals a class's abilities. This is a council-style fight where he has 4 adds with him, just like Morose does in Karazhan. I'll briefly describe the different adds and what they do, but for the most part, if you have a pally tank, just AoE tank them all and have DPS AoE everything on the pull. Or you can choose to CC adds in the entire fight, or one by one, it's up to you. Okay. His adds. Far left, Thurg, an ogre who just melees. He can break CC and has some magic resistance. Priest, interrupts their heals. A dragonkin who flame breaths and thunderclaps. A serpent who spams poison bolts or poison volley. An imp that fireballs random players. A swamp walker that puts a disease on a target that can be dispelled. A wraith that melees and AoE fears. A wight that knocks back. After the adds are either killed or you choose to CC them, we get into the fight. As Hexlord doesn't have many abilities himself, he does, however, attain random abilities from classes. Every 30 seconds, Hexlord will cast Spirit Bolts, which do 450 shadow damage every half second. This damage will increase over time as he gains stacks of Drained Soul, which increases his overall damage. Soul Siphon also reduces the raid's damage by 1%, and it stacks. Spirit Bolts can be resisted, but are not subject to line of sight. Soul Siphon gives Hexlord a wide range of abilities, and I'll go over each class that gets the debuff and what you have to deal with. Okay. If he steals a druid, he gains Life Bloom and Thorns, and these can be removed. It's a hunter, gains Freezing, Explosive, and Snake Traps, and the Freezing Trap has a 10-yard range and an AoE freeze. Mage, Fireball, Frostbolt, Frost Nova, and Ice Lance. And the Fireball and Frostbolt are interruptible. Paladin, Consecrate, Holy Light, which can be interrupted, and Avenging Wrath, which can be removed or spell stolen. There are not unique animations for these abilities, and a couple of guilds ran into the problem of dying to his Consecrate because they couldn't distinguish it from their own Paladin's Consecrate. They decided that, since there were no adds, to have the Paladin not Consecrate so that you could see the boss's Consecrate. Priest, Heal, Mind Control, Mind Blast, Shadow Word Death, Pain Suppression, Psychic Scream. Rogue, Blind, Slice and Dice, Wound Poison. Shaman, Fire Nova Totem, Healing Wave, Chain Lightning. Warlock, Curse of Doom, Rain of Fire, Unstable Affliction. Warrior, Spell Reflect, Whirlwind, and Mortal Strike. The Hexlord fight is better with more DPS, but the longer the fight goes, the less damage you do, and the more damage his Spirit Bolts do, so eventually you will rot and slowly die. Tips and tricks. On this fight, Paladin, Consecration Aura, and anything with spell pushback resistance is really good. Including Shaman's Earth Shield or Priest Shields. Warlocks won't take much of any Spirit Bolt damage due to the Nether protection, so don't toss them any heals. Use personals or self-healing on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Spirit Bolts. Again, mass AoE with a pally tank on the pull is really good strategy and is not as stressful at all. Zuljin, 7,700 armor, 1.6 million health. Zuljin is the final fight in Zul'Aman, and is a 5-phase fight where he takes the forms of all of the animal bosses you fought prior to this fight. Each phase transitions happens every 20% of the boss's HP. Phase 1, Troll Form. He has 2 abilities in this phase. First ability is a Whirlwind, which he spins around and after 2 seconds does 3 to 6,000 damage depending on armor. His second ability is Grievous Throw, which hits for 1,500 to 3,500 damage, and a dot that deals 2,400 damage every 2 seconds until the player has been healed to 100%. That's like the first boss in Slave Pens, where the dot won't remove until you're at full health. Phase 2, Bear Form. He again has 2 abilities, with the first one being Overpower, which is 4.6 to 6,000 damage to the tank, and it's on a 9-second cooldown. His second ability is Creeping Paralysis, which puts a magic debuff on the whole raid that can be dispelled or mass dispelled ideally. If this is not dispelled after 5.5 seconds, it does 4,500 nature damage and stuns for 4 seconds. Phase 3, Eagle Form, is a non-threat table phase where Zuljin sits in the middle of the room as an eagle and does nothing, while his only ability, which is 4 tornadoes, randomly fly around and hit players. These tornadoes are called Feather Vortex and deal 1,000 nature damage and knock the players back. There is a debuff called Energy Storm that is put on the raid, and every spell that is cast makes the player take 1,250 nature damage as well. Phase 4, Lynx Form. He has 2 abilities in this phase. The first is Claw Rage, where he focuses a random player and hits them 12 times, the first for 500 damage, and an additional 150 damage per hit, ending with the final hit for 2,150 total damage for this attack. Oh, the final hit is 2,150 for a total of 16k. Hunters can feign death, and any other immunities can be used, and the Lynx will attack the tank. Zuljin's next ability would be Lynx Crush, where he dashes around the room and does 9 hits on 9 random targets, each hitting for 2,000 damage, and applies a bleed that does 1,500 damage every 2 seconds over 10 seconds. Phase 5, Dragonhawk, is the final phase, and he has 3 abilities. First one being Flame Whirl, which is a 2-second cast that does 1,000 damage and applies a fire damage taken debuff by 50%. Flame Breath is his next ability, and it hits everyone in front of him for 2,000 fire damage, and it's on a 7-second cooldown. Fire Columns are the final ability, and they pick a random player and summon a pillar of fire in a continuous spot that you can move away from. These hit for 2,000 damage per hit. Well, that's the end of his guide. If there are some other consensi, it's take the place seriously at first. Don't try to skip trash. Follow the strategy. People are going to make mistakes. Some people are slow learners like me, and they kind of have to get a feel for it, and that might take some wipes. Don't look at the damage meter. That is a bad idea. Just try to do as well as you can without making things harder for anybody else. Follow the strategies, watch the videos. And in fact, this being essentially an audio guide, I hope when you watch videos, and you definitely need to watch videos, that the videos will make more sense. This has been a meta guide to Zul'Aman Raid. I'm the Expert Layman. Thanks for watching.